of the At The Time podcast. I'm David Brindle. Joining me today is Paul Jones. Paul, how are you?
I'm okay, thank you. You?
I'm good, mate. How's things on your end?
Boring.
I think everyone will join in with that same notion, mate. Obviously, we're all working from home due to government advice to increase social distancing to prevent the spread of coronavirus. So I'm sat in my office. Paul, you're sat. Where are you sat, Paul? I don't even know where you're sat.
I'm sat on the couch in the living room.
I can't get any better than that, can it? Obviously, we were due to do a podcast on the Merseyside derby, which will never see the light of day. But we spoke about this and we said protecting people in society is much more important than any game of football. So it is the right decision. You mentioned there that the season obviously has been extended indefinitely. That's an interesting point because, a lot of talk has been about what will happen with the rest of this season, what will be the outcome. I didn't expect anything to come out as clear cut as this, because I think it eliminates the opportunity for debate, and there's already a lack of things to debate anyway with no sport being on the television. So I'm interested that they've brought this out. What did you make of them saying that the season will be extended indefinitely and being as clear cut as that after all the rumours about what's going to happen?
I think they've done it to quash the rumours, to be honest. I think they've done it to quash the threat of legal action. There's a lot of clubs in various leagues, in various positions that have threatened legal action, depending on the different outcomes. So I think they've been quite decisive in saying that, to quell any sort of legal action and any legal threat, that this season will go on as long as required, really. Whether that be to the end of June, like the possibility has been sort of mooted, or whether that be eaten into July, August, September, we're not going to know yet. Until the public health dilemma has sort of eased. But for me, it's the right decision. You've got to have the integrity of not just the Premier League, but of the Champions League, of the Europa League. You've got Serie A, you've got La Liga. You've got all these leagues that have got competitions and sponsors and television rights and all sorts of minefields to sort of manipulate. And I think that the right decision is the season will finish at some point. We just don't know when that point is yet.
Yeah, obviously, for us, and I think most people, it is the right decision in terms of extending it indefinitely. I'm just surprised at the sense that there hasn't been, maybe there was, but I'm surprised that they've been allowed to say as clearly as this that, the season's going to be extended indefinitely. Because as I say, you've got things like Sky Sports News, a 24-hour rolling news channel, predominantly about sport, and I just wonder how they're going to fill their time now, because they've been having opinions, across the board, really. Brighton's chief executive spoke to the media. We've had sports lawyers, obviously, then you get your pundits, and they've all been giving their opinions, and I just wonder, what's going to go from here? What are people going to speak about from here? And obviously we could get into the whole situation of people working in the industry with freelance who are now going to be in trouble in terms of money, because there's going to be no income for them, because there's nothing to write about, broadcast, film, record. There's just nothing to do until, well, with football anyway, the 30th of April, we don't know, what else is going to be available. The EFL, the day before the Premier League's announcement, said that they're going to make sure that the season gets finished anyway, in any way possible. Do you think that's had an effect on the Premier League's decision making in terms of, did they feel they had to, fall in line with that decision from the EFL?
I think it's probably been a joint decision, and it's only been announced today from the Premier League because the meeting was today, whereas the EFL met yesterday. So I think there's been a bit of joined up thinking. I think the threat of legal action is different In terms of the Premier League, I think, a lot of the legal action was around clubs, the likes of Leicester City, say, for example, who want to obviously progress into Champions League football next season. There's clubs like Wolves who, again, are fighting for Champions League. Manchester United want to get back at the top table. And then, you look at the other end and you've got clubs who are fighting against relegation. You've also got the likes of Leeds, West Brom, who are currently in the automatic promotion spots, who, they want a piece of that cake, which to the tune of £180 million reportedly per year. So, and then if you actually look at the Championship table, I think from third is Fulham, and I think QPR are in about 13th, and I think QPR are only 3 points off the playoffs. I think there's only about 6-7 points separating third to 13th. So I think in terms of the Premier League, there was a lot of clubs pushing from underneath as well to say, if you don't give us a chance to come in and earn, the benefit to the Premier League, then that sort of legal action was there. But I think from lower down, the legal action was not just from clubs in terms of survival, but in terms of players and players' contracts who, for example, League Two players might be on £800-900 a week, but they might have performance enhancements of goal bonuses. They might have performance enhancements of, win bonus per point, things like that. And I think a lot of the players were looking at maybe coming up with some action because of loss of earnings, which when you're earning £800 a week as your basic, but you could potentially be walking home with £2,000 to £2,500. It can make a hell of a difference at that level. So I think it's right, not just for supporters. Obviously as supporters we want to see our teams playing in games and we want to be there to support them. But in terms of clubs and club survival, and also players and their livelihoods as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's unprecedented, isn't it? To think the situation that we're in, we'll probably we may never see a situation like this ever again. The pandemic and obviously it's a difficult one. You mentioned there about stuff like goal bonuses and things like that. It's hard to point the finger of blame. Obviously, it's not the players' fault that they can't earn the money, but it's not the club's fault either. It's not really the league's fault because they're following government's advice. It's not really the government's fault because they're trying to protect society. It's a difficult one to point the finger, and legal action, if any of that was to take place, that would get really messy. Just in terms of contracts, Paul, obviously there's players who are running out of contracts in June. What do you think? Obviously we're talking about the football coming back in April and running into the summer, and we'll talk a bit more about the summer in a minute. What do you think should happen with players' contracts, going forward? Will players get the option to stay on at the same wage? Will they have to play for nothing? What's going to happen with players whose contract expires in June?
I think it's a difficult one. There's a certain club that I have dealings with in League Two, let's say, and a lot of our players' contracts run out on the 30th of June. It's a difficult one because in an ideal world, we might be able to start the football again in May, and from there we can potentially, I think we could finish the season by the 30th of June, but I don't think that's going to be likely the way it's being talked about in the media and the way the Prime Minister's been giving us a timeline today of 12 weeks to stem the flow, basically. So it's going to be a difficult one. In terms of contracts, I think there's a couple of options which all have their own problems. So the option is that you make a blanket extension, and you make that legal whether they want it or not. So, for example, if we get started in June and they believe that the season will be over by the end of July, then you make a blanket decision that every contract that was due to expire on the 30th of June would then automatically extend to the 31st of July. There's a couple of problems with that. Clubs might not want to do that. There might be certain players who are earning big wages, let's say, for example, who clubs basically are waiting to get rid of them, to free up some funds. You might have players who don't want to do that and are potentially being offered deals elsewhere that they would prefer to move on to. So, I suppose one of the options you could do is cancel any transfers between that period and any contract offers between now and the end of the current season. The other option, one of the other options, which would probably be the least popular, is that contracts can expire as and when they are due to, i.e. the 30th of June. But again, that brings all sorts of problems because you're then turning around and maybe potentially finishing a season or 5-6 games of a season with an entirely different squad than, the one that you sort of played the first 40 odd games with in terms of Football League, or potentially, 30 to 32 games in the Premier League. So whatever is decided with the contracts, it's going to bring its own problems. I think the best option would be to, ban any transfers between sort of now. I know that obviously they're not allowed now, but between when the window normally opens on the 1st of July potentially, and the end of the extended contracts and the end of the current season, whenever that may be, because that's another mystery. We still don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah, but would you say move the transfer window back and maybe keep it open for longer? Would that
Yeah,
be a decent idea?
I think so, because I think no matter what happens this summer, the next season, i.e. 2021, is going to be delayed in starting. I can't see that starting
Yeah,
in the first or second week of August. It'll
no
potentially
chance.
be maybe the first week of September at best. So, it may even be delayed further than that. The current model for this season that we're in at the moment was that the Premier League wanted to close before everybody else. That has been scrapped already, and they were due to revert to the last sort of the last day of August, or the September the 1st, as it were, in some countries, for the transfer window. For me, that gives teams 3 or 4 weeks after the season started. So I think we need to do that again. And if the season starts, let's say first weekend in September as an example, then for me the transfer window should be closing at the end of September. I mean, I'll be honest with you, in terms of a transfer window, I don't think there should be one. For me, that the old days of any transfers sort of up to the end of March, I don't see what the issue was with that. But in the current model where we have 2 transfer windows, I can't see there being a problem in just keeping it open for a month longer.
I think you've just found us something to talk about for the next couple of weeks.
Transfer
Something
windows.
about the transfer window, yeah. We'll have a discussion about that, I think. There's going to be nothing else to talk about, Paul. Obviously, we're only having these conversations because Euro 2020, which was scheduled to be this summer, has been postponed to 2021. I'm assuming you're with me on the fact that was an essential announcement to move it back a summer.
It had to be. There was no, for me, there was no other option. To try and play international football, which is supposed to be a tournament in the summer at the end of most European domestic leagues, to try and play that when there's uncertainty around whether leagues are even going to finish, for me would have been foolish. Not only that, but I think there's 12 host nations. It's the first time they've ever tried it. To have countless number of thousand supporters, teams, staff, and sponsors and everything traveling in country. Rome, as an example, is one of the host cities, and to either way, whether it went ahead or not, if it did go ahead, the games in Rome were going to have to be moved straight away. And for me, it just was, in the current way we are. It was a public health risk to have thousands upon thousands of people moving all around Europe for an entire month to watch football. So it was sensible to put it back to next year. I noticed that the African Cup of Nations has also been moved to the same time. So,
Copa America as well has gone, hasn't it?
Yeah, sorry, not that. Do you know what I meant? Copa America, African Cup of Nations is due in January at the moment. Whether
Ah, right,
whether
okay.
that is changed is another matter.
Yeah.
But to be fair, no, I did. I meant the Copa America, and it looks like next summer is, looking ahead and positively, is going to be just filled with football. You've got I think it's the under 21s championships. You've got the women's
Yeah.
championships. You've got obviously Euro 2020, or whether it's going to be called Euro 2021 now. You've got Copa America, and obviously again, whether it stays in the winter or moves to the summer, you've also got the African Cup of Nations as well. So,
Do you have any concerns about... We're saying 2021 is going to be a summer jam-packed full of football, and God knows what of other sports as well. Do you have any concerns that could be an issue further down the line? Depending on how long it takes to sort of get this pandemic under control, to bring football back. Have you got any concerns about 2021 being even too soon?
I mean, it's potentially, for me, there's two options. Depending on how long the pandemic continues for, obviously then depends on the start of the following season. Now, there's two options. We either squeeze a season in and finish at the end of May next year, for the 2021 season, which could potentially mean, less games in the Champions League and Europa League. It could mean scrapping the League Cup or the Football League trophy. It could mean something to do with the FA Cup being scrapped. I personally wouldn't like to see many of them happen. But, we are in an extremely tight calendar regardless of any delays. So to then add delays onto that as well, obviously, it really is a test to the tightness of the football calendar. So the other option is that, let's say we don't start till October, November. You've then got a World Cup in 12 months' time, which would be sort of December 2022. And although you would lose a season in theory, if you don't start the 2021 season until October, November, it might just be worth seeing that out and finishing that around June, July, and then, maybe having a bit of a longer break and having the World Cup winter. Whether how they would manage that, I don't know. And again, as I say, there'd be all sorts of legal challenges because you lose a full season in theory. So for me, I think that the way forward is probably going to be to look at a bit of a tighter season next year. You'll have 38 league games, but you might end up playing twice a week, pretty much on most weeks, especially if you're in European competition.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention the Qatar World Cup. I was going to ask you about that. Do you think any lessons can be learned from... Obviously, this disruption compared to what a Qatar World Cup's going to bring is completely different because, this is a pandemic and, there's people dying across the world. The World Cup is the World Cup, and we know the World Cup is coming. We didn't necessarily know the coronavirus was coming. But do you think the disruption that it's caused midway through a season in a Premier League, will that help the fans cope with the change, the players and the managers, the people involved with the game? Will it have any benefit for them in terms of the disruption to the season?
I think it's probably totally different because the difference in 2022 with Qatar is that, as you say, we all know it's coming, whether we agree with it or not, it's coming. B, there is football on. There is at the moment absolutely nothing on at all, whether that be Premier League, most European football, right the way down the Football League, the National League, non-league, junior football, Sunday football. There's nothing. There's not a game of football to be seen anywhere. But the World Cup has a bit of a special sort of feeling around it. There's a bit of a World Cup fever, and the whole country, if England do well, just goes crazy. There's a feel good factor around. Whether that'll be the same in the winter, because you know I know a lot of people who would say that there's nothing better than sitting out in a beer garden in the sun, watching the World Cup games on the telly. But in the winter over here, when it's probably -5 outside, I don't know if there's going to be that same sort of feeling around the World Cup. But I don't think much can be learnt in terms of for the players and coaches because, again, at the moment this is unprecedented. We didn't expect it. Clubs are currently, players are currently sat. Well, when I say sat, they're at home with their own private training regimes. They're not training together. They're not in international camps. They're not mixing with people. So I don't think too much will be taken from it in terms of looking towards the World Cup in 2022.
Fair enough. I was just wondering whether it'd be, the disruption. Would there be anything you could take from it? But obviously, we know, as you say, Qatar, the World Cup is coming. We know that. We've known that for a few years. I don't think many people seen this pandemic coming. Just in terms of football that's actually on, I've just had a little scroll through there, and I think the only leagues that I've spotted that are on is the Australian A-League.
Now that surprises me because Australia's got quite a bit of a pandemic itself, so that surprises me.
Exactly. And I think in Australia, is it the RL, Rugby League?
The NRL.
Is going ahead. And the NRL, that's the word I'm looking for, Paul. And is it the AFL?
Yeah, that's the Aussie rules, isn't it?
That's going ahead as well. Yeah, the Aussie rules is going ahead. There's football in Singapore, which surprises me. And somewhere else, Belarus, the Belarus Premier League is still going ahead. So if you are desperate for football, I mean, I don't know how available it is on television or online, but there is bits and bobs of football dotted about, and obviously teams as well on social media doing some weird things. We had Connect 4, Hull City against Bayer Leverkusen, Norton crosses between Man City and Southampton. Have you enjoyed any of that on social media, Paul?
To be honest with you, since all this gossip has been coming out about coronavirus, I've come off it because it was doing me head in reading about it and people spreading, daft rumours. And I was reading for about 2 or 3 days non-stop that the Premier League was going to be stopped and, the season's going to be void and this and that. And I just thought, you know what? At times like this, I don't need the gossip. I need proper news so that we can plan accordingly. We've all got family members, and close relatives and friends who we need to make sure are okay at these times and make sure they're safe. So, I didn't want to be reading all the gossip that was around, and I wanted matter-of-fact news so that we can plan accordingly for sort of elderly residents and local people who may sort of be a bit more unfortunate than some of us are.
Absolutely. Shall we be a bit journalistic and tell people what to do to prevent coronavirus? Do you think that's worth it?
You can do.
Let's do it, Paul. So I am on the World Health Organization's website, and on there it tells you to... I mean, people should be fed up of hearing this by now, by the way. Wash your hands frequently. I think I've seen a lot of football players doing that recently on social media, washing their hands and singing happy birthday and things like that. Maintain social distancing, which is what me and Paul are doing right now.
I think
it's at least 3 feet.
One of the main things I'd like to say about maintaining social distancing is, I have seen a lot of people sort of moaning about it, but it's not difficult now. We're in 2020. We've got so many gadgets. We've got the internet. We've got wall-to-wall television. We've got all sorts of streaming services that we can pick up and put down as and when we please. We can watch series after series and of whatever we want. And, there's probably never been a better time than 2020 to cover 24 hours a day for 14 days. If you need to social distance for 14 days, it's so easy. I think back to probably the last time anything like this was even remotely was probably the World War II. when there was hardly any. I don't know if there was televisions at all. There was the wireless, which probably went off at midnight. There was wooden toys and war bunkers and stuff. There was none of this. All sorts of games consoles and computers and internet and all the rest of it, where you can just feed your entertainment till your heart content.
Yeah, and Football Manager came out this week for free as well, didn't it? So people can actually play that for free.
You can have it free for a week, can't you? So, if you've got nothing better to do for 7 days and you've got to social distance yourself, get on there. I'm on it. Under Mansfield Town. Make sure you sign
Paul
me.
Jones. Yeah, I was going to say sign Paul Jones as a scout. He'll recommend some right wrong'uns.
Yeah, absolutely disgusting. Make me stats absolutely stink.
Before we move on from social distancing, Paul, what have you been watching? What have you been doing? I know you're not working from home yet, are you? But what will you be doing?
Yeah, so as you already know, but not many people who watch this will. I work for the NHS, so it's been sort of all hands to the deck. I have been still going into work, into the hospital, and we have offices and things like that. So at the moment, we've been told that as of next week, we will be working from home, to try and sort of curb the spread of the virus. In terms of what have I been watching and things, I've been listening every day at 5 o'clock to our Prime Minister's press conferences, and I've also been watching news channels where it's obviously keeping us up to date. I think it's difficult because it's changing all the time. It's changing very, very quickly. You mentioned before that we done a couple of podcasts last week, and they've just not gone out because we recorded them, and then the next day they were out of date. So
yeah,
it's difficult. You've just got to keep up to date.
Obviously, the Merseyside derby got cancelled.
Well, exactly. Yeah, and there will be a time where we can do them, and it's nice and easy, and we go forward and we talk about football, which is what we're here for. But at the moment, it's just keep your eye on the news, follow the government's advice, keep washing your hands, keep your social distancing, look after relatives. I know it's hard. I've got nans and granddads. I've been FaceTiming them instead of going round to see them. I know it's difficult. We all want to spend time with our loved ones, but I just make sure that I send a little message and give it a FaceTime every night and make sure they're okay.
Yeah. You've got. I know it sounds a bit mad, but you've got to do this now to prevent the spread and protect, particularly those in the targeted groups or in the at-risk groups. You've got to do these things to protect yourself. And them, protect them as well.
I think
we spoke about this last week, Paul, didn't we? I said, I'll be fine if I get it, but if I spread it onto someone else, they might not be.
And I think that's the harsh reality is, I say fit, but we're relatively young, relatively fit. We might be able to see off the virus, but I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I had it and didn't know and passed it to somebody else who wasn't as able to fight it off as I was, and ultimately caused them some serious problems. So I agree with you. It's, follow the advice and let's just reduce it as much as we can.
Yeah, as you're saying, if you're struggling to follow that advice, don't do it for yourself. Do it for those that you love who are, as we say in them, at-risk groups. The only other things we haven't covered there, Paul, is avoid touching your eyes, nose and mouth, and practice respiratory hygiene, which basically means covering your mouth and nose when you cough or sneeze. And that'll help you.
I mean, to be honest, it's we're not asking people.
It's common sense, isn't it?
Yeah, we're not asking people to do anything that you wouldn't normally expect them to do. Do you wash your hands? Of course you do. So wash your hands. When you sneeze, you put something over your nose. Of course you do. So just keep doing it. Catch it, kill it, bin it has been a massive slogan in the NHS for a long time, and it's still relevant today for this virus as well. If you sneeze into a tissue,
absolutely,
catch it in the tissue, screw the tissue up and put it in the bin. We're not asking you to do things that are beyond people's capability.
Just finally, Paul, before we do move on and finish Non-league football is obviously now suspended as well. It wasn't originally suspended, but it is now. What sort of impact do you think that could have on non-league clubs?
I think there's going to be a twofold way to look at it in terms of non-league. I think, if you look at the higher end of non-league, so you've got the National League, obviously the National League North and South, and then you've got step 3 and 4, which is your Northern Premier League, your Southern Prem. They have lads on contract, so they rely on gate money. They rely on people coming through and putting £10 in the pot to enter the stadium and buy a hot dog, buy a programme. That simply keeps these clubs afloat. Without that money coming through, these clubs have still got to pay people who are on contract. They've got to honour them contracts. So that's going to cause problems in itself. As you go further down, you've got then obviously sort of steps 5 and 6, which, for example, is your Northwest Counties League, your Northern Counties East, and where there's not as many players on contract. So in terms of running costs, it's not as big, but they do still need to keep the players, and although they're on non-contract terms, they need to keep hold of them because at some point the season will complete. Now, whether they can, because of this gap, because of this break, is another issue. And I think in terms of, it's been hard for some clubs. That I know a certain club in the Northwest Counties, Ashton Town, tweet. The chairman Mark is quite active on Twitter, and he tweets quite regularly throughout the season about how many games they've had postponed. And I think last time I seen it, 3 or 4 weeks ago, they were up to 14, postponed obviously due to the weather. They've now got coronavirus as well, postponing games. And so it's been a really, really difficult season in more ways than one for non-league. And I think it's testament to the volunteers that put the time in, from top to bottom, up and down the country, whether that be volunteering to play, managers, coaches, physios, to people who run the clubs, who are on the committee, who get the sponsorship in, who make sure the money's there, who keep the pitch in as good as order as volunteers can. And I think it's difficult for them to keep functioning. But one thing I will say about non-league is a lot of the clubs are resolute. And I think, that they'll fight their way through it. There might be some who struggle, but I think the vast majority will fight their way through it.
I certainly hope so. There's a really good interview I done today with Don Rimmer from Liddell and Remacher, who kind of detailed what it is going to mean for non-league clubs. Obviously, Don is the chairman of Liddell and Remacher, so he's got a unique insight into this sort of things. That's definitely worth a watch. Later on or straight after this, just head to Facebook or Twitter, Liverpool TV, and you'll be able to catch that. I just hope that it doesn't cause too much of an impact for non-league, and I certainly hope that it doesn't come back behind closed doors, because that'll be even worse if it comes back behind closed doors. You say about players on contract, there'll be players who'll get paid per game. So obviously, if there's games being played and no fans coming in, that's going to be even worse for those teams. But again, it's important that people are safe. We don't bring football back under pressure of people getting bored and wanting football if it's not safe. So make sure you stay safe, and hopefully all of our non-league clubs in Merseyside and beyond will survive and do okay. Paul, that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you very much for your time as ever.
No problem, thank you. It's been nice to talk to someone instead of sitting in the house.
I know. I don't know how we've managed to get so much out of so little, but we have. So that's kudos to you. This could be the last episode of the Other Time podcast for a little bit. Obviously, with no football and no sport on, especially Merseyside based.
Unless people want to tweet you with subjects we can talk about, and we can just meet up every week and talk about whatever.
We could start doing really, really random stuff. which we might delve into in a week or so. But don't be surprised if nothing is happening from our end for the next couple of weeks. I'm sure we'll come back with something quite, I think, Paul, what we need to do is treat this like it's the summer and come up with content as we would for the summer.
So what you're saying is we've got to make up some fantastic rumours and talk about them.
Definitely. Which is what everyone else is doing right now anyway, aren't they? Let's face it. I've read today alone.
There's nothing else to write about.
Today alone, no. I think when Bruno Fernandes won Player of the Month, there must have been about 300 articles within 10 minutes. Various sources, because there's nothing else. I've read today that Liverpool are interested in signing Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. I can't even remember his name. It's been that long. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. And I've read that Everton are about to sign Donnarumma, the AC Milan goalkeeper.
Oh, right, okay.
And I just think, everyone's in isolation, so how are they coming up with that? But anyway, for now, that's all we've got time for. Hopefully, we'll be back as soon as we can to ramble more nonsense. But Paul, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I'll speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon.
I hope the move goes well, working from home.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Thank you.
That's all right, no problem. And we'll see all of you very soon as well. Thank you very much.